Welcome to Podcasters on Education, a roundtable spin-off of the Have a Life Teaching podcast. I'm your host, John Shimbari, and here we'll bring together education podcasters from K-12 classrooms to university campuses to talk shop about the stories behind their shows, the ideas shaping their episodes, and what they are learning from the guests they are interviewing. So whether you are a teacher, leader, or a lifelong learner, this is where the people talking about teaching come together to reflect, question, and collaborate. So pull up a mic, lean in, and join the conversation. Because when education podcasters talk with education podcasters, we uncover what's next in learning. Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new format for our episodes here on the Have a Life Teaching podcast. Don't worry, the old format or the existing format where we sit down with leaders in the education space talking about ideas, that's still staying. But another thing we're going to be doing here on the podcast, maybe once a month, maybe twice a month, is to talk with educators who have their own education podcasts, particularly in K-12, but maybe eventually there might be a little bit of university overlap. As my listeners know, the goal of the podcast at Have a Life Teaching is to really ensure that we're sharing important ideas in education so our students achieve, learn, and grow. And tonight, in this sense, that's no different. But again, I thought it would be a great opportunity to have a roundtable of education podcasters, all of us talking about our podcasts, so that way my audience can learn about them and their audiences can learn about each of our podcasts and really build content on content in a way that can be engaging for our listeners. So I'm really appreciative to my three podcaster guests on the show tonight. Several of them, you might know their names from the podcast when they came on as guests. I also have been on two of their podcasts, and it's going to be a fun conversation just talking about our podcast. So what I've asked my guests to do, and then I'll introduce them, is they're all ready with a question written on a piece of paper, and they have no idea what question they're going to be asked. And then whatever their number is, that's the question that I'm going to give them from my list of questions. We're just going to have a conversation around that and see where this impromptu format goes. Before we do that, let me introduce my guests, the podcasters talking with me tonight. The first guest is Johanna Tremontano. Johanna is the host of Literacy Landscapes. So a lot of her content talks about the importance of literacy. We are also joined by Steve Miletto. You might know of Steve's podcast. It's an award-winning one, Teaching, Learning, and Leading K-12. I've been on both Johanna and Steve's podcasts, so very excited to have them here tonight. We're also being joined again by a repeat guest. In fact, Crystal Frommer not only is one of our inaugural guests on this format, she was also my first guest on the original episode of the Have a Life Teaching podcast. So there's no one better to rely on than Crystal when you're starting something beta. And Crystal is the host of Learner-Centered Spaces. So, folks, thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Glad to be here.
All right.
Such an honor. Thank you.
Thank you, Crystal. It's always an honor to talk to educators, and knowing the three of you personally, I'm really excited to have some fun with this tonight. And like I said, let it rip and we'll see how it goes. And we'll see what I have to cut out. Johanna, you never know what you're going to have to actually cut out of a podcast. So again, my listeners, tonight might be a little bit different than what you're used to from me. Buckle up. Anyway, so does everyone have their number written on a piece of paper?
I
got
do.
mine.
All right. So I'm going to start based on who I see on my screen. I'm going to start with Johanna, Crystal, and then Steve. So don't show your number yet unless it's your turn, but don't cheat. If that's your number and somebody else had the same number, that's okay, because then we could banter and talk about similarities and differences in your answers.
Ready?
There she is. Yeah, Johanna's one with the post-it notes and the colored
Here, I'm
marker.
unblurring so I could show it.
Yeah, I've known Johanna for a while now. All right, Johanna, you go first. What's your number?
My number is number 4.
All right, you ready?
I hope so.
And then my other guests, Crystal and Steve, think about her answer because are more than happy after she gives it to engage and we could all talk about her answer and rate it.
Oh boy.
All right, you ready, Johanna?
Yes.
Have you used your podcast to spotlight student voice or classroom stories? If so, how has that landed with your audience?
That's a really interesting one. In a way, I have, and I've also used it in my classroom. Right now, I'm back in a 6 through 12 setting, but for the past 6 years, I was a director and chair for a graduate program supporting pre and in service teachers. So I was in the teacher education realm, and it was a really great opportunity for me to talk about some of the great practices I was learning from some of my guests in the realm of literacy with my students and making it really exciting for my students to hear really exciting things. For example, I'm going to name drop already, but I don't know if he's going to be hosting Reading Rainbow 2.0, but Michael Threets was on my podcast. And so for me to talk about what that experience was like, to talk about library joy, to talk with my students about what that experience was for him to be a librarian and why he chose that path and how literacy is really about giving everyone a voice and a space. So I think in that sense, I brought my podcast into my classroom. There's a tension between sharing student information, so I'm always really cautious about that. But it has been a space for me to think about what are some issues students are grappling with. So I've definitely had the conversations of AI. It's a big one. It's a hot topic. We talked about it, John, on one of our episodes. So I think there are some issues or how to teach writing, which is notoriously challenging, especially for students who may be diverse learners. So as I think about the ways that I brought student voices, it's been in ways that have addressed student needs in different ways.
Steve, what do you think about that?
I think that learner-centered spaces, we could do more to highlight student voice. We usually have on educators ranging from elementary all the way up to post-secondary, talking about how their classroom or what they do in education centers around learning, and that includes the adults and the kids, if that's the case. And in fact, only once have we had a student be a guest on the podcast. Usually it's an educator talking about students. We had a college student come on, and we also had my niece come on the show. I would like to have more student voices of especially high school and college age students, and probably along with the guest. I think that would really emphasize what we're doing with learner-centered spaces.
Of the same mind here. My focus has been I bring on authors that are different sorts of ed tech entities or different groups and individuals that are talking about specifics within education to work with teachers, administrators, and such, the classroom teacher and the building administrator. But there are some stories that I like to share once in a while about trying to bring in student voices as a principal and putting together a group that meets with the principal monthly, at least, willing to share their thoughts. The idea is that they would be seniors in a high school and they would share their thoughts and ideas about what they liked, didn't like. That way they have direct access to the principal, and it would be a group that is designed to be from all the different groups in the school, but about 18 to 22 kids. I tell some stories from that organization, which helped tremendously as I developed the idea, stole the idea originally, and then adapted it to my schools. And eventually they get into serious stuff, like their teachers not have enough time to teach topics or subjects because they're too busy doing paperwork or things like that. And it's pretty amazing as they start trusting the administrator to do that. So I've told some stories around that, but like Crystal said, mine is more adult voices talking about the things to help adults. And I need to reach out and have more kid voices involved.
But I'm glad, Steve, you said that because even though you haven't had a lot of students on the show, again, by sharing those stories of where you have had those connections with students and how you tell those stories on your podcast, hopefully somebody will listen to those stories and go, hey, that's a good idea. Let me do that with my students. And just like Crystal, I focus mostly on adults as well. Actually, all of us do, all four of us. Most of our podcasts are centered on adults. Like Crystal, I have had students on in one episode that was talking about them they were, I believe, oh, I remember what it was about. They were juniors, I believe. Or no, actually, take it back. They were freshmen and they were competing for this National Leadership Award. And their project was to help their peers deal with the stress of highly competitive academic environments. So, how do they, yes, be competitive in and of themselves to do the best that they can, but not let that stress derail the importance of the social emotional piece of being in high school? Like all of you, I think I could probably add more direct student voices, whether that's having students on the show talking about what the adults are talking about, like actually seeing the impact of what the adults are saying that they're doing with students. I think similar to Johanna, the only thing I worry about that is the privacy aspect. So even when the students came on my show, that one episode, we didn't use their names because I want to make sure that they're safe as well. But even already, this first night of our podcast, I think this is something that's resonating with me that we could probably all do a little bit better in bringing on those student voices, particularly because we are also, all of us, talking about how to make learning more inclusive of student voices. So why not have those student voices on? So I love it. I love it. All right, Crystal, you're up. So give me
No,
your number.
I'm number 3.
Okay, here we go. Crystal, how do you decide which instructional practices or hot topics are worth covering on learner-centered spaces?
Usually pick our guest because they're interesting and we know they're doing some really cool, innovative work. And we let the conversation flow in the direction of what they're currently doing or where their interest falls. So it's not so much topic driven, it's more of the guest that motivates the podcast episode. We do talk often, however, that the conversation naturally flows towards AI. That's a really hot topic right now. We often dabble a little bit into going gradeless or de-emphasizing grades, which leans into a progressive education concept that is not the most popular topic, but I think there's many educators out there who are ready to de-emphasize grades or go gradeless in their classrooms and look at different ways to assess students. We do have a set of questions, just basic questions that we typically ask, but again, we let it flow to where they would like to go. One of the questions I almost always ask is, how does assessment play into a learner centered space? Because assessment doesn't mean tests, quizzes necessarily. There's so many types of formative and summative assessments, and we really want to dig into that no matter if they're elementary, college, or outdoor education.
Love it. Yeah, in fact, just yesterday in my student teaching class, the conversation came up about, are we assessing our students too much and in too rigid of a way, particularly around standardized tests? So I definitely think that has been a hot topic and remains a hot topic. And like you're saying, Crystal, I too have had educators on talking about outdoor learning, and I've had educators talking about place-based learning. And there's always an opportunity to assess in more authentic and alternative ways. So thank you for sharing that. Johanna, Steve, either of you, whether you talk about assessment on your show or if you have a formula for determining which hot topics would be of interest. Go ahead. I think Johanna came off mute.
I'm happy to share. Yeah. So my podcast actually is all about literacy in and out of the classroom. When I first started the podcast, I really wanted to make that point clear. It's all because literacy is in everything we do. There's the literacies of cooking. Even dentists have a way of speaking and writing, right? And everything. And so I've had someone who's a specialist in CrossFit talk about the literacies of CrossFit. I've also had academics. I had Dr. Sarah Hart talk about her book about literature and math. I have both academics, I have classroom teachers, and then I have really interesting folks who talk about like the literacies of their world. And then I've started moving into almost more thematic explorations. I did a whole series on Yiddish. I just like I've been doing like deep dives, and now that I'm writing a book on the high school to college transition, my upcoming season is going to be focused on that. So Crystal, I may pick your brain to hear about some of the questions you asked your college students, because I do want to hear. I know that students right now have very diverse needs that are very different from when I was a college student, right? Hearing more student voices is going to be really important, and also just really exploring the experts in the field who can speak to it. So that's where I'm thinking. Yeah, I'm thinking a little bit more thematically now.
Now that I know this about you, Johanna, that you had a whole show or series on the Yiddish language, I think you should probably, when we're ending, sing some of the songs from Fiddler on the Roof. Steve, how about you?
My title was designed at a time when they were telling us that you need to put as many words into the title as you can for SEO. Of course, that's not part of the algorithms anymore, but teaching, learning, leading is all about.
That's part of why we're here.
But the whole aspect of it is to be a broad range of things that I think would be interesting or needed for the classroom teacher, building administrator in the different aspects of what is there with school. So that even includes some of it's, like I said, the current topics. Looking for one of my topics I was focused on for a while was PLCs and aspects about the PLC and how to run. And then sometimes I'm talking with children's authors who are specifically geared towards young children and learning from the books, like words and things like this that can happen. And other times it's been ed tech and seeing what we can do there, but it's all about trying to create. Part of it is me and what I'm interested in. And remembering in the different positions and how it might impact them. And so one of the things I also bring in is that I seek out authors of different types of books. I've had poetry, thrillers, mysteries, and science fiction and things like this. And I talk with them. And one of the things that usually comes out when I talk with them about possibly being on my show is that they say, does your audience want to know about this? And I said, and I usually convince them this way, which is teachers or readers. I said, number two, most of them have thought about writing a book. And number three, they usually teach kids who somewhere in there, they've thought about writing a book. And usually I don't have to get to number three, because by the time I get to number two, they're like, we're good. All right. So we ask questions about process and stuff like this. But my whole focus has been on trying to find those things that would change from time to time, totally go from the PLC to recently I did a whole session, which was just me talking about mediocrity and why we don't want it and what we can do about it type thing. That's a little bit about what I do.
Yeah, I would say, Steve, that your honesty resonates with me. Even me, a lot of times the episodes are on what I want to explore. Obviously, I'm trying to make that connection, the why, where we should all be thinking about this, even if we're not thinking about it. For example, I recently had an episode where I was talking with Lindsay Cormack about how to raise a citizen. Clearly, that's of interest to me, but I more or less think that should be an interest of everyone's about now. But I don't think we need to go too deep into that. But clearly, it was something that was passionately resonating with me that I wanted to present. But again, presenting it in a way that could be utilized by teachers by listening to the episode, because I do want, and I'm sure we all would agree with this, we want our episodes to be practical resources for folks to use. There are two ways I often find guests. One, if I'm driving on a long commute and I'm listening to NPR and something really cool comes on, I have to try to remember it until I could pull over and put a text note to myself. Got to have to reach out to that person. So, yes, people do know me as a stalker. And then, two, I go on Amazon and I look for books that are coming out soon in education because what author who's a new author doesn't want exposure? So that kind of also determines the topics, not even just my own interests, but who wants to come on a podcast to talk about their thing. Because let's face it, some people are so big in our space, they don't need to go on a podcast. I don't know. Did anything Steve say about how he determines who's on his show resonate with you? Oh, yeah, there we go.
Yeah, I think I'm thinking of something Steve said and something you said, John. I'm very reflective. So I think about what's meaningful now, right? And what are needs now? And how can I evolve to meet needs? What are teachers grappling with now? What are students' needs now? And John, I'm not going to say I stalked, but I did reach out to someone on Twitter years ago when I first started my podcast. I reached out to Jeff Pearlman. He's a sports writer and he wrote a book about the Mets. He's a well-known sports writer, super accomplished. And I don't know what came over me, but I was like, you know what? I want to know about what makes sports writing like super effective, right? And I messaged him and I really thought he'd say no. And then a week later, he's sure, when? And I was like, I nearly fell off my chair. And he was so kind and so lovely. So it was just a really surprise for me, but I don't do it regularly, John. Sometimes if someone's interested.
Have to stalk. You have to stalk. That is you just proved your own story there, Johanna. You have to stalk to get the big names. As long as you're not doing it physically, I'm sure no one will put a restraining order out on you. Now, I'm going to actually put Crystal on the spot here. And if she doesn't want me to go in this direction, I promise you, Crystal, I'll take it out. But what you were just talking about, taking that leap, Johanna, and finding guests, I distinctly remember having a conversation over a coffee with Crystal in Brooklyn, New York, when we were going over how we got our guests. And I told her she needed to stalk, and she told me she wasn't stalking. So I want to ask her now publicly on this podcast if she is now starting to stalk her guests.
Okay, I do remember that conversation distinctly at that cute coffee shop in Brooklyn. And we were talking about the great Peter Liljedahl, the author of Building Thinking Classrooms, who I have a selfie with because he's so famous in my eyes. And I am too intimidated to ask him to be on our podcast. But if he's listening, do you want to be on our podcast? So, also, my co host is Star Saxty. She's the author of over a dozen books, and she knows so many people in the edu world. And so I usually rely on her to find some of our big hitters. Like we had Angela Watson on the show, we had Jennifer Gonzalez with Cult of Pedagogy on the show. We had Mandy Jansen on the show, who is a great author with math education. Just so many people that have made me nervous because I'm like, I follow your work and I see you online. So I usually rely on her, but you're right, John. I need to get over my fear and just reach out to these big hitters who I admire and just ask them to be on the show.
Excellent. Now I'm going to give you a tip, Crystal. So and what prompted this conversation is we were talking to, for our listeners, about Peter Liljedahl coming on my show. One way he will like your show more than my show and more than me is make sure you give him an hour. Give him an hour so he could talk about everything that should be talked about. Because at the time, and I do feel bad about this. So, Peter, if you're listening, I apologize. I was still trying to figure out my cadence of what was long enough for the guests, but not too long. So, Peter, I apologize. Crystal's going to make it up to you by giving you an hour on her show. So, Crystal, you got a task. You got to reach out. So now, I don't know. Did I ask everyone a question? Did anyone else? I guess I jumped in there. Did anyone else want to respond to? I think it was Steve who had the last question.
You didn't ask me my number.
Right.
I didn't answer you your number? Then that's
Nope.
the next
Heard.
question. Okay, that's right. See, I got confused because you responded to the last one, and somehow we talked, and really it was me gabbing that I actually thought that was your number when it wasn't your number. All right, Steve, you're up. What's your number?
8.
8.
There it
Okay,
is.
let's see what we got for 8. Steve, education is filled with competing narratives. How do you avoid buzzwords or fads and instead highlight what really works in schools?
I think one of the ways that I do that is determining by looking at things that I'm interested in and thinking about. And so I have to ask myself, is this something that I want to talk about? Because sometimes it really is. When everyone was talking about AI in the beginning, I was the one asking them, all right, so I'm going to, at the end of us talking, I'd say, now, is AI really AI? Is it, or is it something else? Because one of my favorite books is of all times is The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And I hope that you all know that one. And there's a character in there named Marvin who likes to say things like brain the size of the universe, and they asked me to go get a cup of tea or something like. And I feel like that's where we are with AI. But one of the things that in the beginning I was like, okay, there's a lot of people talking about this. So is this a buzzword, or are we in 2001 and Hal is talking to Dave about whether he needs to exist or not and what's going to happen here? And so I do a little bit of that myself. Sometimes I've stopped asking the question about whether AI is really here or not. It just depends. I like having some of that buzzwordy stuff sometimes and sometimes not. So it just depends on the day.
Steve, again, you're making me think that maybe the question shouldn't be, do we avoid buzzwords, but which buzzwords should we be propagating and talking about, even if we're using synonyms and other words, and which buzzwords should go the way of the dust? Because you're right. Maybe there's a reason why some of those buzzwords are buzzwords because they're actually important concepts in school improvement work that we need to talk about. I don't know. What do you think about that, Crystal or Johanna?
I can tell you right now, there's one word that needs to go away, and that's rigor. I am so tired of hearing the word rigor. It means stiffness. It does not mean what we think it means as far as a root. And I would like to get rid of it. I think we can replace it with challenge and developmentally appropriate. And I just think every school needs to take the word rigor off of their website.
Ah,
And I told Chat GPT to never use rigor when I ask it to write something for me. It knows I don't like it.
the other day, somebody told me I should challenge ChatGPT in my prompt so it doesn't just give me the answer that it thinks it wants to give me. So that was my AI tying into what Steve was saying moment yesterday. And now today, you're making me realize because I'm in the process of creating a bot for my work. And Crystal, I'm going to own up to it. I have a file called Rigor, but you have convinced me I'm going to rename it Challenge because you are right. It is stiff. And if anything, when we do use the word rigor, we want it to mean students engaging, students talking, students thinking deeply about things. You've done a number of shows, you and Star on that. I've done a number of shows on student voice, student critical thinking, using questioning more deeply. I had Eric Francis on talking about that. So you convinced me, Crystal. I'm going to go back and change my navigation bar just because of you.
Good. I'm glad.
You should be, because eventually your transcript from our show is also going on that podcast. And eventually this will go on that chat bot.
Right.
And so people who access my chat bot, and I know it's going to be hot, talk about hot topics, they're going to hear your words about that. But I do actually agree.
Awesome.
How about you, Johanna? Are there any words that just really bug you in education?
Oh, oh gosh. I don't know if it's particular words. I have a tendency to overuse buzzwords, and I'm talking to publishers about my book, and that's something that was feedback I received. For me, I think it's more the mindset thing. It irks me when people have a deficit perspective of students and where that's always,
Oh, yeah.
they're like that rubber band where they're always coming back to that. And there's no room in my heart for that. So I'm always like, because every child has strengths. So we always have to like also look for those bright spots and elevate our students based on that. So that bugs me. And something that I was also thinking in just this whole discussion is that like also things from the past, some things are good and have to stand the test of time. And it's so funny because I was talking to an English teacher at my school the other day about something I used to do 15 years ago. I called it annotation station. But basically, the irony is I'm going to use ChatGPT to type up the directions. So I think it's really funny that something I used 15 years ago, I'm now just using AI to help me like lay out what I did, right? But it's a practice that I used over a decade ago that I think is still meaningful now to support students with literary analysis. So I think some things are just I'm going to get off my soapbox now.
Oh, that's a good soapbox.
Thank
You know,
you.
you're welcome. I have to say this. Now, this is old, what I'm about to say, but one of the words that used to drive me insane was unpacking standards. And I got to the point where if I heard it one more time, it was not going to be pretty. All right. And because everyone was talking about unpacking this and unpacking that. And what I wanted to say is what you're really talking about is just figuring out what it's asking you to do. So please stop using that word. That's
You're ready to pack your bags.
You don't like the
Appreciate it.
orderliness of that, Steve?
because I'm thinking that all you're doing is convoluting the whole thing. You're making it more messy as opposed to just telling us that you're going to explain what the standard's all about. Right. But yeah, when I unpack a suitcase, usually I've stuffed it full of stuff anyway.
And that is probably when it's the same way. I will say that the comment that bugs me, actually, to Johanna's point, about a month ago, I was working in a school, and the teacher that I was coaching and working with did tell me or asked me, have you ever worked with these students before? That's why we coached together. So that's why we gelled when we coached together at that organization that we won't talk about, at least
Yeah,
public.
but I agree. When you're coaching teachers, right, and you're in that line of work, whether you're a school-based administrator or working for an organization, the focus is always on how are we supporting the students that we're serving, right? And so the mindset that we bring to that work is hopefully one that is all about productivity and support and not and putting students down in any way, labeling in any way that's not meaningful or helpful.
Yeah. And I will say, and this kind of loops back to what we were talking about before about hot topics and nails on chalkboard moment or a concept, is when people say, I'm a visual learner or I'm an auditory learner. Actually, we can all learn from all of those ways, right? And so that actually prompted me talking about that courage thing to reach out to John Hattie to get John Hattie on the show. And he did. And super nice guy. And I was really nervous about doing that and asking. And like you, Johanna, he said, sure, I'll come on. So, Crystal, we're looping back. Have that courage because you've been out there enough. People know who Crystal Fromert is. They know you got good stuff. You're publishing something on Edutopia every 2 days. So
I've read your things, Crystal. I've read it.
Thank you. Thank you.
No, so
Yeah, you're right.
You are
I
a
did-
known quantity yourself now, Crystal. It's time. It's time. I'm sure if I looked on my phone, there'll be another Edutopia article right there.
I will get the bravery to ask some of my stars that I follow. Yes.
All right, folks, any other parting words of wisdom to other education podcasters out there you want to share who might be on the fence about starting a podcast or actually telling them, no, don't do this because this is a colossal amount of time?
I've never regretted it. Yes, it's a lot of investment and time. I've met the most incredible people, including everyone here on this panel this evening, which I'm so grateful to have met and hope to continue the conversation. I've learned, I feel like as a lifelong learner, it's just another form of professional development for me. I'm always learning and growing and like to share what I've learned too. And for me, I'm also really proud because my son made my podcast theme song. So it's something that I get to, and my son has helped me like edit some of my episodes. So it's also something that is really special for me. Thumbs up, get family to help.
And I will say, I'm very proud of you, Johanna. I'm noticing a lot more video content coming from you. I'm very proud.
Thank you. I'm a little camera shy.
Johanna, I completely agree with you about the professional development. I love talking to the broad range of guests. I always learn something new from them. And I hope that our listeners also get the same thing from the conversation. It is like free PD for me. And I just get to meet the most interesting educators. Sometimes when I'm talking to a guest, I'm literally writing down, I'm going to do this tomorrow. I'm going to do this tomorrow in my class. So it's made me a better educator by being an interviewer on a podcast for sure.
Yeah, what you guys are talking about, the power of this is just incredible. This media is that we have our own radio show, we have our own TV show, whatever you want to call it. The sky's the limit when you start talking about it, unless you got sponsors or censors or something who's saying, don't you talk about that. But it's such a powerful way to get to know people. You get a lot of people reaching out to you, find out different things, and have all these different discussions, and you find out some people are hilarious. And it's just such a cool thing to do. Advice to an education, someone considering it. Originally, I wanted to start a podcast when I was high school principal. I was worried that maybe I'd have a boss or two that I'd accidentally say something that they didn't like or something like this. So I waited until I was in a little different type of world in education and started doing it then. But the equipment's so reasonable now and so accessible. And one of the biggest things is figure out what you want to talk about and go ahead and record a couple of episodes so you get a couple under your belt. And just know that at some point you're going to go, oh, I've got to make the donuts again. I got to get up and make the donuts, go to sleep, make the donuts. And instead of donuts, they're I saw you guys laughing, so it's cool. You know the reference, all right? So
I sure do.
awesome. It becomes that way sometimes with podcasting. So you got to recharge your batteries up because it's fun and widens your universe. It's so cool. It makes you think about things that maybe you didn't think about before.
Exactly. And although I'd known Johanna in another context, and that's how we met, I met both Crystal and you, Steve, this way, right? Soon, Steve, we're going to meet in person. And I had the opportunity to meet Crystal in person. So that would never have happened if this podcast didn't exist. Now that I teased her about Edutopia, I'll leave on this note. It is because of Crystal that I had the opportunity to write on Edutopia because she made that connection for me. You never know if I could add anything to why to have a podcast, despite the fact that you are waking up and going to bed going, oh, I got to edit that. And oh, I got to spend time uploading. You never know how it's going to connect with other areas of your work as an educator. I'm even now starting to think about how do we use this episode in a professional development. Now, granted, I'm not taking anyone's book or anything, but just our conversation. How can we use that where it's not just a conversation and it's not just a learning opportunity if someone happens to catch it, but how do we actually bring it into formal professional development as well? So there are many, many angles that you could connect folks out there, your podcast to. Johanna, Crystal, Steve, thank you so much for your time tonight on this first inaugural episode or sub episode spinoff. I don't know what you call it. Spinoff of the Have a Life Teaching podcast to be named. I don't even know what I'm going to name this yet. But anyway, thank you to the three of you for coming on today.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Sure.
inviting me. I appreciate it, John.
Great to have you. And like I said, you three are troopers. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Podcasters on Education, the roundtable where education podcasters talk with education podcasters. If you like today's conversation, please follow or subscribe to the Have a Life Teaching podcast wherever you listen and share with another educator who loves a good discussion about teaching and learning. I'm John Shimberry. Until next time, keep amplifying voices and reimagining what learning can be.